What up, Wizards? It's Dev from the place. Still feeling that old-time jubilation because we just had 7 cards banned in Standard yesterday, and although it seems kind of counterintuitive, losing 7 cards actually gives us a lot more cards to play with in Standard. It feels like half the rares in the format were just unlocked because we lost all these cards, and now them brew juices are flowing. Gross, I know, but at this point I'm doing more work than an oyster shucker at a Joe's Crab Shack. I have been all over the format in the last 24 hours, looking at cards that I kind of always wanted to play, but never really got the chance to play. I know everyone's kind of scrambling for the best new deck in Standard because that's just human nature, I guess, or at the very least the nature of Magic players for sure, but instead I've been combing over looking at some spicy cards that I think might actually have a place in the format for the first time. I could be doing like the top 8 best decks to play after the bans and stuff like that. I think there's some pretty obvious answers here. If you want that list right now, it's stuff like Jeskai Oculus. That's awesome. I guess Founding the Third Path rotates, but whatever. You've got stuff like Caretaker's Talent that you might want to play again. Not too much rotates from that thing. I'm going to look at my notebook, don't mind me. Enduring Curiosity. We get to resolve that card again. It costs a whole 4 mana, but we don't have to worry about playing 4 drops so much anymore without all the mice and the omniscience combos running around. There's stuff like Insidious Roots that seems to be doing really well in the format even before the bannings, but do beware because Tyvar rotates and it's one of the best cards in the deck. If you wanted to play Unholy Annex, I guess you could do that, but again, I guess Archfiend of the Dross rotates. I don't know how much it's going to hurt the deck, but that is a thing that's going to happen, so play it while you can. Simulacrum Synthesizer doesn't seem to lose a whole lot of much. You know, these big scorecards aren't going to rotate or anything, so if you want to play a solid artifact deck, that's probably the one. Collector's Cage is still available in the format. Not too much rotates out of that pile either. That's another one that was doing surprisingly well just a couple of months ago before Is It Cutter started to wield its ugly head. And then Agatha's Soul Cauldron. There's a build with Vivi that was doing really well even all the way up until the World Championships, or the Pro Tour rather. So these are all decks. All the ones that I've named, there they are right there in writing. Those are all decks that I think you should probably be playing right now. They're really, really good. But that said, there's cards that I want to focus on above these decks. And I want to focus specifically on cards that aren't rotating in this video. There's a lot of good stuff that does rotate. You know, if you wanted to play Phyrexian Obliterator for the next month, I guess you could do that. Jace the Perfected Mind Mill is great, but it's gone very soon, I guess, to the happiness of a lot of folks out there. Venerated Rod Priest. I can't wait for this card to get out of my Standard, but I haven't seen it in forever. Kind of worried that I will be seeing it a little bit more over the next month. It's actually a really good deck, but there's also stuff like Vraska, Innkeeper's Talent. If you've never seen this combo before, then good for you, man. Innkeeper's Talent leveled all the way up basically makes it to where Vraska comes into play with enough counters to ultimate, and then when you do ultimate her, Innkeeper's Talent makes sure they get enough poison counters to kill them right then and there. It's a dumb combo, and I haven't seen it in months, but could be back for another 30 days. Apart from that, maybe it's just a race to see who can ramp out Atraxa or reanimate Atraxa the most efficiently. Could be a thing. She's still in the format for a while. Urabrass Forge is still in the format. Maybe we see a return to the red-white sweeper-based Urabrass Forge deck. And finally, Goblins. Kind of a weird pick, but Goblins was doing surprisingly well on MTGO a few months back after it got a couple of pieces. It's still going to have Krenko and a couple of other important Goblins, but it does lose, I think it's called Runvelt or Rebelbelt Horde Master to the upcoming rotation, and that's going to hurt that deck a good bit. So get them Goblins in while you can. Again, there are cards that I could focus on that rotate, but we just don't have long to play them. Instead, in this video, we're going to talk about 10 cards that aren't going anywhere anytime soon that I think we should give another chance to. Let's talk about 10 cards you should be playing in post-ban Standard. And I'm your favorite Magic Channel's favorite Magic Channel. Best believe that the professor go bananas for my deck tech. And we're back. Wouldn't that be crazy if we were actually Beck the whole time? Gained a couple of pounds, lost a little bit of hair, still a loser, baby. Anyway, we got 10 cards to talk about today with surprisingly no honorable mention. I guess if you want an honorable mention, it's all that stuff I just talked about a second ago. Rotating cards. But anyway, we're going to go ahead and get to it here because kind of got a lot to cover today, and I've kind of already covered a lot. So with that in mind, let's check out number 10. Kind of on the same tip as Goblins, dovetailing from that. I think another creature type that's underserved and did really well earlier in the format is Lizards, represented here by Gev's Scaled Scorch. But, you know, there's also Hired Claw. That's a really good one-drop that kind of still sees play even before the bannings in mono red decks. So try that out. Iridescent Vine Lash is a cool card. They've got the thing that's kind of like a Burning Tree Emissary. I forget what it's called, but like the 2-drop lizard that makes black-red as long as they've lost life this turn. That guy's awesome too. They've got card advantage lizard too, man. Like Blizzard's is really good. So if you're looking for the top of the line best aggro deck in standard, maybe look no further than this now. It was definitely never a weak deck, and I don't think anything's changed. Actually, I do think a lot's changed since the banning. You know, maybe we go from mice being the best creature type in standard to suddenly lizards takes the crown. It's like a Mario Kart finishing podium. Anyway, number 9. Let's go ahead and get to that. Is Ugan. You remember that Ugan that came out in like Tarkir Dragonstorm that kind of was quickly forgotten about? But I do think the card is actually pretty good, and there's multiple ways to make this build. If you want to, you can make it mono green and do kind of a ramp thing. If you wanted, you could go mono white and play a bunch of sweepers in the deck. That tends to be fairly effective. If you wanted, you could go Selesnya, just do both. Porque no less dos. But there's even like a oops all colorless kind of build in standard right now to really take advantage of his ultimate, right? If you want, you can play things like Heateron Archive and the Iron Crag, which will ramp you a little bit into the Ugan. You can play Karn Silex and Filigree Silex to blow stuff up if you want to. Some of those will rotate, but you know, it's still a good idea if you want to do that. And then finally, Bahamut just dropped in Final Fantasy, and that seems like a pretty fun card to either ramp into in the Ugan deck or just go get a bunch of free copies of Bahamut and win the game off Ugan's ultimate, which was not necessarily that easy before, but with a bunch of Bahamuts now, I'm pretty sure you'll force scoops with that. So altogether, I think that Ugan probably did get better. If mid-range is viable in standard again, right, then I think that Ugan might be the best sort of top-end mid-range engine that we currently have access to, especially considering we're about to lose the 7-mana Nissa that was completed, the 7-mana Kaya that's just really hard to get through. Typically, those are really good late-game plays for a mid-range deck to kind of just hold the line with, but I think that especially upon rotation, Ugan instantly becomes like the best expensive walker in standard, and there are plenty of cards you can play that are relatively high card quality that can support him. And don't you sit there and try to tell me Hedron Archive is not a quality card. That card's awesome. Anyway, let's move on to number 8, which is Raise the Pass. Now, this does lose a somewhat important card coming up. It loses Elisil Core. We all, myself included, and maybe I'm the most affected in this, lose Elisil Core. My fiance, we haven't gotten married yet. Maybe we will right before rotation just to solidify things. We're still in love. Anyway, Elisil Core is gone very, very soon. That's going to make me a very emo boy, but the deck still has a bunch of really good cards, If you want things that like trigger life gain when creatures come into play, it's still got Hinterland Sanctifier. It's still got the 2-mana Bat. That thing's pretty good. Life Creed Duo, that's its name. Thank you, brain. It's got Case of the Uneaten Feast. That's a good card, even though it's not a creature. Still awesome and particularly good in Raise the Past as like a 2-of. It's like, a secondary, if you don't find your Raise the Past, I guess it could work, But yeah, either way, the Starscape Cleric deck is really, really good. Even before rotation, it kind of folds to control decks and some graveyard manipulation. But with everyone talking about how good graveyard decks might be now, which I kind of don't get their argument, not really, but still, everyone talking about how good graveyard decks might be right now, from Reanimation to Agatha Soul Cauldron to the Insidious Roots and onward. I haven't really heard many people talk about Raise the Pass, and I think you need to take a second look at it. This is another deck that can effectively just win the game on turn 4, and even if you don't win the game on turn 4, you got a bunch of pretty cool, really fun creatures. You're gaining a bunch of life, so if people are trying to find the best aggro deck, kind of helps against that, right? You've got removal against the Screaming Nemesis, so you don't really have to worry about them as much. There might be something to Raise the Past. It was already kind of a solid deck in terms of I'm going to win the game now on turn 5 or whatever. It was already kind of okay at that, and it's got some decent resiliency going for it. It can win the game by attacking sometimes. I've always liked this deck. Obviously, the kind of guy I am, I like this deck. And I just wanted to shine a special spotlight on it because I think that it might be real now. But let's move on to number 7. I spent way too long on that entry. I really like Raise the Past. Number 7 is Outcaster Trailblazer. If you're looking for something to replace Up the Beanstalk, there's not only Trailblazer, but I guess you could try Garrick's Uprising. I've actually seen it as a 1 and even a 2 of in certain MTGO builds as like copies 5 and 6 of Up the Beanstalk, right? Especially when you're playing a bunch of big creatures anyway. But Trailblazer makes mana. It's really good in multiple copies especially. And, you know, you can basically play it for free on some turns. It will provide a lot of card draw throughout the game. And for what it's worth, ramping into large threats, Terror of the Peaks, and other 5-drops, and even all the way up to like Vaultborn Tyrant might be a slightly more viable strategy nowadays, considering that mice aren't breathing down your neck on turn 3 and Omniscience isn't killing you on turn 4. So again, maybe this opens up a ramp, and things like Outcaster Trailblazer are really, really good in ramp decks. You can play this as early as turn 2 off of Alana War Elves, and then start getting real advantage off of it as early as turn 3. So I think it's a pretty dangerous card, and I think Garrick's Uprising is too, but for my money, I think I like Trailblazer a little bit more in this slot. Let's move on to number 6, which is yet another attempt to find a spicy new aggro deck, one that didn't even exist last month, and in this case it's Tifa Lockhart, the newest card in the entire video actually. This thing just came out and hasn't had much time to really do anything in Standard, but you know, that said, if you're a patron, you know that this deck just won the most recent Patreon poll. Problem with that is that that poll was like 8 days ago. And I've been waiting. The reason for that is I've been waiting for the ban announcement to put out a Tifa deck. Basically, I wanted to see how many cards we lost. Turns out we lost not just Monstrous Rage, which you might have assumed was in the deck, but also Heartfire Hero, which I'm not sure you would have assumed is in the deck. We're playing Self-Destruct in there, just in case Tifa's power gets huge enough to kill them on turn 3. Sometimes it happens. But, you know, Self-Destruct really helps with just throwing a Tifa at them. It was also really good with Heartfire Hero, but now we have to play Cacophony Scamp, which I guess is fine. But either way, I was trying to figure out what Standard would look like before I put the Tifa deck out. But now that we have a better idea, there's still a lot of tricks with Tifa. You know, things like Turn Inside Out and especially Wild Ride are incredible with Tifa. You know, it takes a couple of turns, but starting relatively early in the game, you can play a Tifa into a Wild Ride into a land drop, and that is crazy. Suddenly she's like 8 power or whatever, and tramples and swings that turn because Wild Ride gives haste. There's still plenty of pump spells that are really, really good with Tifa, and considering that we're not all just trying to beat mice on turn 2 or 3 now, maybe people will lay off some of the main deck removal and give Tifa a little bit more breathing room. But even if they don't, we got stuff like Snakeskin Veil and many other cards in Standard to protect her, make sure we can hit those big turns. So maybe some kind of red-green landfall deck, or at the very least a very low-to-the-ground Tifa build, could be a reality in Standard now. This is a very powerful card. Now, my number 5, I keep talking about aggro decks, and I haven't really put a 1-drop on the list yet, surprisingly, so I guess let's fix that, because Paw Patch Recruit was already a really, really, really good Magic card. Unlike a lot of the other cards on the list, you're not necessarily going to build a deck around Paw Patch Recruit, but now that we've lost Heartfire Hero, I think this is one of the better options in Standard, for real, for 1-drop creatures in a really aggressive deck. Despite what I've just said in that Tifa entry, I'm just not sure that all the aggro, all the removal is going anywhere. People, until rotation at least, will still play the, Torch the Towers and the cut downs and the go for the throats and all the small ball removal spells that we're relatively used to. So with that in mind, I think that Paw Patch Recruit gets much, much better than a lot of other 1-drops, because even though this doesn't have any sort of protective aspect to it, if you are going somewhat wide, or even if you just have one other creature out, then Paw Patch is going to put some counters on stuff whenever any of your other creatures get targeted, and I think that's actually kind of a big deal, especially in a Tifa deck. That's kind of cool, but it could also work well in, weirdly, a mice deck. It's not a mouse itself, but still, putting counters on stuff like Emberheart Challenger is relatively important. So, I don't know. I think this card is quite good, and if you want to try rabbits, you can. We actually just lost to rabbits on stream the other night, but I guess if you know me, you also know that me losing on stream isn't anything special, but that was like one of the only games we lost all night. We were playing with Naya, Sarah, Farah, and Legends. That deck was so good. We won like 6 in a row. It was awesome, but we did lose to rabbits, mostly because Beauregard Mentor is really good, but also because Paw Patch is really, really good. I really think this is among the best 1-drops in Standard right now. I hate to repeat myself, but I think it bears repeating. My number 4 is Doppelgang for sure, and I think this is off of a lot of people's lists because like Invasion of Arcavios rotates. There's a lot of the reason why people thought Omniscience might not get banned is because Invasion of Arcavios rotates. But neither one of these decks, Doppelgang or Omniscience, really needs Invasion to win the game, much less Doppelgang, you know? You're not always copying Invasion. Sometimes you're copying any other thing on the entire table, Roxanne, Ancient Cornucopia, whatever, and you're winning the game effectively that way. Or maybe you play the one Vault board in your deck. Some people are playing Dragonback Assault in these teamer decks, so you can copy it, or you can copy a bunch of the dragons or whatever. It's just, again, the deck does not need any of the cards that rotate to stay a thing. And again, if we're talking about like long ball, kind of slow burn mid-range decks in Standard, this one might actually have an even better like late game plan than, you know, an Ugan deck. And I would say that that's actually not a very controversial statement. Doppelgang is an extremely powerful card that once it gets the time, once it gets rolling, is almost undefeatable once it gets itself into position. And even though it might need a few more turns after it gets into position, those turns feel more or less fruitless, you know, for the opponent that's playing against it. So just don't forget that Doppelgang exists. The card isn't going anywhere, and it's always been powerful. Every time a new set comes out, you got to be thinking if a thing is a good target for Doppelgang. We got a lot of stuff that is. My number 3 is, in a lot of ways, the card that I am most scared of moving forward in the Standard, and that is Reenact the Crime. And I think that's exactly what the card is going to do. Very fitting name, because even though we've lost Abuelo's Awakening, this is a 4-mana way that does not rotate to get that Omniscience out of your graveyard on turn 4. And in case you're not familiar, the turn count's very important when it comes to the Omniscience deck. If we back it up to, say, turn 5 for Una or something, then that's a little bit more breathing room in the format. But Reenact only costs 4 mana, so it's effectively the same thing as Abuelo's Awakening in some ways, and it is not too hard to make sure that you discard the Omniscience that turn, and it's not too hard to make sure that you discard it for effectively no mana, so, or mill it or whatever, you know. So I think that Reenact is actually a really dangerous card moving forward, and if people keep trying to make the Omniscience deck a thing, it won't be Una, it won't be Repair and Recharge. I assume it will be Reenact the Crime that is the likely culprit here. But if number 3 is the card that scares me the most, I think that number 2, let me word this perfectly, is the card that is the most newly powerful card in Standard, right? This card was already really strong, showing up in a couple of different lists, but now I think it's all the way powered up, and it doesn't have all these other aggro decks getting in the way of it. Fear of Missing Out is a ridiculous Magic card, ladies and gentlemen, especially paired with some other cards in the format, but kind of solos some of the time just by itself. But this makes the Gruul Delirium deck kind of tick in and of itself. It's the strongest card in Gruul Delirium, which just picked up some pieces. It's playing Terra from Final Fantasy now, but it's got Patchwork Beastie and stuff too, Wildfire Wicker Folk. It's a really strong aggro deck, even though it's kind of a fair aggro deck, and I've always kind of liked that about it. But it now doesn't lose anything, but it was playing a sort of pump spell that is in this deck on the level of Monstrous Rage. It's the one that can give their creatures double strike if they have Delirium, and that can be a serious spell in the Delirium deck. It wins the game a lot of the time when the deck is just kind of curving out and going aggro mode. So this might be, in some ways, now the actual best aggro deck in Standard. There's a bunch that are vying for that title, but Gruul Delirium was already doing fairly well even a week or two before the bans in MTGO leagues and challenges and stuff. So just because of Fear of Missing Out, I expect this deck to do a lot even better nowadays. And for what it's worth, Fear of Missing Out is also amazing in the Jeskai Oculus decks, which kind of moved from a Control-y package into a Jeskai package that plays Tursa Light Shatter. Now it can play Joshua if it wants to. It was playing Inti a lot of the time, and Fear of Missing Out, a lot of sort of aggro-y cards that let you discard the Abhorrent Oculus and then helping hand it back. So I think that Fear of Missing Out plays a pivotal role in two of the most, again, newly powerful decks in Standard that were already strong before, and we're probably going to be seeing a lot more of now. But I guess the last thing I'll say about this is, even though it's a part of two such powerful decks that I think will be popular now, it could still be the backbone of a lot of decks that we necessarily don't have access to right this second, right? Again, a Tifa deck could maybe leverage this card well, and a bunch of other aggro decks too. So Fear of Missing Out is an incredible piece that has not quite gotten its due, but it's been in the background of Standard since it was released, and I think now it's ready to finally step on stage. But if number 3 is the one that I'm most scared of, and number 2 is the one that I think just got the biggest power boost, number 1 is the one that I think is maybe the spiciest, which of course has to be number 1 on my list at least. It is Prof's Eidetic Memory. It doesn't necessarily replace Up the Beanstalk, but you know, it does do that thing Up the Beanstalk does that we're talking about in the ban announcement, where even if it's answered, it's still got some value. And in this case, it can not only provide the drawn card the turn it comes into play, but it can also provide counters the turn it comes into play. And that has been especially good in specifically this like Vivi Agatha Soul Cauldron combo deck that's trying to, you know, give other creatures Vivi's activated ability, but also passes around counters so it can make Vivi's power higher, thus getting you more mana. Card works in a couple of axes with Vivi. You know, it's a non-creature spell, so it triggers Vivi. That's very sick. Draws cards. That's awesome. No maximum hand size is great in Izzet decks. This does a lot just in the Vivi Soul Cauldron deck, but in general, I think that in kind of a, this is going to sound weird, but a blue-based aggro deck, or even maybe like a Dimir tempo deck, the likes of which we've seen fairly recently, I think Profs could be a pretty, you know, key card. And yes, 3 out of the last 4 cards have been from Murders at Karlov Manor. That is an undervalued, underappreciated set, and I think I'm trying to show that here, but Profs is one of the most undervalued, underlooked at cards from an undervalued set. So again, I think we maybe need to go back now that we've lost incredible card advantage, you know, mid-range engines alike up the Beanstalk, and take a look at this one, which is not necessarily similar to Beans, but it's a 2-mana enchantment that draws a card when it comes into play and provides value for the rest of the game. And in this case, that value can be easily gamed in such a way where you're putting, you know, 2-3 counters on a creature more or less every turn, and that is big stuff. So I've always really liked this card. I think it's relatively cheap to get set up, and especially now without such a really fast aggro deck in Standard, again, maybe you have some breathing room to play a 2-mana enchantment, thus sacrificing your turn too, right? So I don't know. I just think there's a lot to this. You could also play a 2-drop, a 3-drop, wait till turn 4 to play Profs, and then, you know, double spell. There's a lot of ways to leverage this card that I think are actually really good in a Standard where you can actually get to turn 4. You know? So again, I've got some hopes for this one, and even though it might not be the spiciest card in Standard, I do think that it's one that people don't look at enough. But that's basically Itsky Lewitsky. Make sure to let me know what cards you're excited to be playing now. I know that my list may be not as spicy as you would have thought it would be, but there's a lot to talk about in Standard right now, and I'm sure we'll get to some spicier picks. You know, I talked about some cards that might be on your list, like Dragonback Assault just came up. Is that card good now? I don't know. Let's find out together. I've been kind of looking at the initial results for the first couple of days of the new Standard on MTGO, and the results are really, really neat. We'll talk about some of those tomorrow in Wednesday's video. So make sure you're subscribed if you want that content. Trying to get to the next 1,000. We just got to, I believe, 137,000 subscribers, guys. Thanks for that. I really appreciate it. But trying to get to 150. I need the 12,000 of you watching this who aren't subscribed to get in there and give it a shot. But anyway, y'all, make sure you like the video. It's the button shaped like a thumb. You can't miss it. Also, check out the Patreon. I promise, patrons, I will get that Gruel Tifa video out this week for you. We'll get more deck techs before Edge of Eternity spoilers drop. I have to promise you that, and I mean it. But in any case, the magic world moves fast, and I appreciate the support. If you're already a patron, if you're considering becoming one, it would mean a lot to me. It just takes $1 a month to support the channel, and it helps out a lot. But that's all I've got for now, y'all. Just hit me up with your opinions and thoughts, and especially the cards you want to play now in Standard, down there in the comments, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love, and be kind.